Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's session of Automation Hour. As always, we'll run through some logistics before we kick off the presentation. So Alex, if you want to move to the next slide for us. All right, all lines are muted. However, we absolutely love the interaction from our audience. So please feel free to use the question widget here in GoToWebinar or post your questions to our Trailblazer Community Automation Hour group. We are recording this, so you'll get an email with that after the session, and it will also be posted to YouTube. And we invite you to connect with us wherever makes the most sense for you. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, the Trailblazer community, and of course our website has a lot of great information there too. So speaking of great information on our website, this is the range of topics that we have covered throughout 2023 as we have turned Automation Hour into a Learn Flow bootcamp. So first half of the year, we got started with prep and into how to build some of those flows. And then on the next slide, we'll show you what we've got for the rest of the year. So we are talking now about some best practices and some other things that you should know. So today, Alex is going to talk to us about error handling, and then we are going to get into some more of the tools that you have available to you in Salesforce for automation as we wrap up the end of the year. We'll even talk a little bit about Apex. So of course, we can't bring this to you without the support of our generous sponsors. So we want to make sure we say thank you to them. First, Concrete.io. We've been with them since the beginning of Automation Hour, and we want to say thank you to them. Next up, our second sponsor is Sumo Scheduler. They'll also be doing a demo for us next week on a special episode of Automation Hour. So if you haven't had a chance to check them out, definitely recommend you do so by attending that. And of course, last but not least, our final sponsor is ActiveCampaign, who helps us send all those wonderful reminder emails to you so you can attend our webinars. So yes, your co-host with you today, Michelle Hansen, me, and of course, Rakesh Gupta. Thrilled that you can join us as well. But we know you're not really here to see or hear from us. We want to turn it over to the star of today's show. So Alex, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. Thanks so much for coming back to present on Automation Hour.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for inviting me. So I just want to introduce quickly myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Alexandra Dabanovic. I'm a Senior Product Manager as Business Technology at Okta. I'm also a 9-time certified Salesforce MVP, and I have been working with Salesforce since 2014. I'm also a Vancouver admin group leader and the organizer of the True No Dreaming. We took a little hiatus over the pandemic, but we promise we will be back next year, even bigger and better. I also am a proud graduate of the Red Women Academy. I completed both of their courses. Shout out to all the amazing coaches and volunteers there and organizers. Thank you so much for doing all that for the community. I'm also a proud member of the Platform Champion Alumni Group. So we started as a Lightning Champion, moved to the Platform Champion, and then were retired, but most of us had stayed Platform Champions for life. I'm also a TDX and Dreamforce speaker. So if you're coming to the Dreamforce in September, you will probably be able to see me in 3 sessions at this point. If you see me anywhere in the hallway, please stop by and say hi. And if you want to connect with me outside of this webinar, you can find me on Twitter or X or whatever is the name of the app. This is my handle, or we can connect through the Trailblazer community. So whatever works for you. So let me quickly go through the agenda of what we're going to talk about today. So regardless of if you have been working with Salesforce and Flow for a while, or you are just coming to the state of the flow, I'm going to take a few minutes just to explain and go through the state of the flow, what happened with the flow, how it was developed, what happened through the years, and where we are today, and hopefully where we are going in the future. I'm going to talk about type of the errors that we can see with the flow, whether it happened, what is the location, what's causing them, and then we're going to delve into the ways of handling, different ways of handling error in the flows. And at the end, we were just going to provide a quick summary and maybe hopefully hear from you as well. Do you use any of these practices? Do you have any other ideas how to handle errors in the flow? So let's start with the state of the flow. So Flow has existed in Salesforce for a little more than a decade now, but they were initially somewhat limited and not easily configurable. For those of you who remember, Flow Cloud Developer was not intuitive or user-friendly. So in 2015, Salesforce released a new automation tool called Process Builder. And it was initially much easier to use than the old Flow, and it was able to perform more complex tasks than workflow rules. So because of that, Process Builder quickly became preferred no-code option to automate tasks within platform. However, with everything else, performance issues and limitations around triggering conditions easily become evident with Process Builder. And Salesforce released several enhancements over the years, but the tool constraints that came from the foundation of the product could not be removed. So after a long wait, in 2019, Salesforce released a new generation of flows that was called at the time Lightning Flows, what we know as a flow today. And in this release, the brand new Salesforce Flow Builder when this was introduced. So the new flows received, if you remember, some skepticism based on the recent experience with Process Builder. However, Flow quickly demonstrated superior flexibility and the capabilities that we were all looking for. And the teams showed that they are actually addressing those limitations and performance issues that we've seen in the Process Builder. So over the next few releases coming to the day, flows have received a significant number of enhancements. Some that I just want to mention here and that you probably are aware about is screen flows, which means we just have an automation tool that will allow admins and developers to deliver guided flows through the screens and logic connection. And these flows can be invoked through the UI. So they are taking actually users on a step-by-step journey to finish business processes, record change flows. So flows that are triggered automatically when the record is changed, updated, or deleted. So they support logic that can be triggered even before the record is written or removed from the database. Flows have support for LWC, so we can invoke Lightning Web Components with a flow, which is giving us more flexibility on the logic and functionality, how we're going to use it. Flow support API calls, so we can use invocable Apex classes and API calls directly from the flow. We have the option to use subflows, which gives us the opportunity to use more complex flows. So we can create one master flow, one major flow that we can actually use to control these other subflows that can be invoked from it. Flows can also run in bulk. So flows support bulk action, and that helps addressing performance issue when we talk about updating multiple records at the same time. Flows have the option for debugging. So they have a graphic interface that will actually make it easy to read and understand through the debugging process. We're going to go a little bit over that in our demos. And then flows also have a fault path, which is a way to handle errors. That is what we're going to talk about today. So these features are just the tip of the iceberg. So when we talk about the types of the errors in flows, we know that flow can involve a lot of elements. It can have dynamic decisions, it can have complex process, it can handle different business logic. So in order for flow to be successfully executed and completed, all the elements have to work properly. If only one part of the element breaks, or flow breaks, the flow will throw an exception, it will get an error, and we can say that the flow completed the execution. So while there are many different reasons for flow to break, there are some common culprits. And you can see on the screen, there are two different types of flows. One of the main reasons that is designated in flow that we call unhandled error can be caused by many different things, such as using the wrong field, using the wrong variable, using the wrong logic in the flow, maybe having too many SOQL queries, not handling null values properly, having the validation rule that conflicts with flow, so stuff like that. The second most common reason is the permission errors that we are seeing. That means that the object and field level security for running users are not set up properly. So in both cases, users see these errors, and the errors in both cases are not user-friendly. They usually contain the code that further explains what error happens. However, these both issues are identifiable and in turn fixable. So in addition to displaying the error to the user, Salesforce also sends an error email in the default language of the users who ran the flow. And this email is either sent to the admin who last modified the flow or to the Apex exception list recipients. So these error emails are important because they give us the specifics that relate to the flow problem and can help us with the troubleshoot. But before we go to the flow emails, let's see how we can actually handle the errors. So where do these error messages appear? So when it comes to the places where you can actually see flow errors, that depends on the process that was automated and the role that user plays. So for end users, the flow error is being displayed on their screens, usually when they start some action or they're in the middle of it. So let's say user wants to create a new record and they click on a button to launch the flow that will do that. If there is an error, user will see the screen that looks something like you can see on the screen under the Salesforce UI. And you can say that it's not a very friendly way of communicating with user, especially with users who might not be technical that something went wrong. So for admins and for those who build flows, errors come with the email notification that contain more details. You can see that on a second screenshot. And this detailed email is, as I mentioned, sent to the person who modified the flow or to the list of the Outtakes exception email recipients. So we can actually control who you'll get this error, and they are being sent to those addresses that are listed in Salesforce. So if you're troubleshooting a flow that fails, the debug option in Flow Builder is going to be your best friend. This is where you're going to see the flow error as well. So you can use the debug to see the real-time details of what flow does. You can check this input variables. You can restart the flow from any time to debug a different branch. And the only thing that I want to highlight here is that if you debug a flow without choosing to run the flow in rollback mode, the flow will perform its actions, including any DML actions and any Apex code executions. So even if you just close or restart the running flow, that will not roll back the previously executed actions or callouts or commits. So this is something to keep in mind if you're using the debug option to look at the flow error. And to understand how flow works in the context of the whole system, and then go deeper in understanding each and every step that happened during the flow run, not just the flow, but the whole automation that you have on certain objects or record, and how that impacts related processes, your best bet is to set up the debug logs and then look for flow error message there. So this is another place where we can see the flow error. And this is not the most user-friendly way of debugging, but it's definitely the most detailed one. So in our session today, we will cover how we can enhance the debug log flow error message so we can take full advantage of this approach. So let's dive into each of these. So how we can handle the flow errors. So every automation process is at risk to fail at some point. So the situation with flow is should be expected. If you build a flow, it will fail eventually. So when flow interview fails, users see an error message. And when that happens, user can go back one step to try to fix it or to try to make a change. So it's on admins and Salesforce configurators to try to handle this error in a way that can provide some guidance for the user, but also notify relevant parties that something happened. So as I mentioned, that can happen through the flow error notification that's being sent to the email. We get that error message on the screen. However, these out-of-the-box processes are not always enough. So today we will go over the few approaches that we can use to cover how to handle flow error depending on your skills, on goals, what to do next when the flow fails. So today we are going to cover 4 approaches. The first one is using fault connector in flows. We're going to show you how that's being done and then go over the list of actions that can be used to handle error message in this way. We will also go over how we can utilize the power of platform events and then track the error messages to custom objects. We are going to see how we can deal with flow error message in debug logs and what are the ways to improve that approach. And we are going to go over the latest flow feature helping us to handle the flow errors natively, which is the custom error element coming in winter 24. So let's do it one by one. So fault connector in Salesforce is a native way to handle error messages. So we can create fault error from any of the data elements. Those are the little red ones that you have in your flow builder, or any of the action elements. Those are the little blue ones in the flow. So to create a fault connector, you just simply have to create a second connection from your element after creating your first connection. And in case you don't have a first connection, you just want to create a fault one, you just connect two elements 2 times and then remove the first connection. So fault connector is opening several ways for us to handle error message. So in ScreenFlow, we can create another screen element with a custom error message and then display user-friendly message. We can also decide to send an email notification about the failure to the specific group of people who might not be listed as a recipient of that Apex exception email notification list. You may want to go a bit further and report on all the flow errors happening. Maybe we can create a custom object, something called like error log or flow error logs or flow error exceptions, and then create records using the information available from the flow global variable. So you can also use this fault path maybe to create a case record for our admin team or a support team to look at what's happening. So handling flow errors should be the best practice used in every flow you build. And in order to avoid repetitive build and ensure consistency and save time, you can create a subflow that will contain all the steps for handling error messages and then invoke that subflow whenever it's needed. You can invoke it multiple times if needed as well. The main thing to remember here is that when you're invoking the subflow, you need to pass the flow error message values to the subflow so it can run. Another thing to highlight is that if there is a fault path included in the flow, and at some point this flow fails, and it will go down fault path, every DML action that happens before that fail will be committed. So the flow transaction will fail. It will not end successfully, but the actions and operations before that will be committed. So let's quickly look at one of the flows that we have here. So this is a screen flow called BSS needed. It is a simple flow that user can start from the case object. It gets information from the case object. It gets information from who that case is assigned to, and then leads user through the screen details to ask him what is additional support that support agent might need. They might need additional support from the BAs. They want to provide more information about issues, and then provide information about the customer itself and its work. If that information is being gathered, we want to create BSS case, which is a case record with a specific record type. Then we want to send email to confirm the creation and then let user know with the confirmation screen that that case is being created. But if one of these information fails and the case is not being created, we want to make sure that we handle that. So this is where we add our fault path. And in this case, we want to send an email alert. We send an email alert to the support manager, to the admin group, and to the user itself, making sure that they know that we noticed that this flow has been failed, that the information is not being captured, and we will reach out to them. We are also creating an additional case for the IT support team to look at what happened with the flow. Does user have all the necessary access? Is there any problems? And then we are also adding the error screen to the user to make sure that they know that we looked into this. So I think, yes, this is the one. So I ran this flow earlier. This is what happens. Let's look at the debug details if you go through the logged. So we go through the screen. We go from one screen to another. We get the information. We ask user to select one of the options from the default screen. Go to the next. We have, as I mentioned, we have transaction committed. User is going through the screens, they're selecting different options. And at one point, when they come to the create record element, we notice that this element cannot be executed. It's failing to create a record. So we have an error message here that this cannot be created because another process failed. This message is not super friendly. We don't know why this process failed. There are a bunch of codes, doesn't mean anything. But because we have that fault connection, we have the message that this error was handled. So notification email was sent. Oh, okay, this is something else. Let me come to that later. And then the case is being created. So this is what happens. If we want to go down this path, but we don't want to have any of these things committed, we might want to add Apex exception. That means that we will have to go and create an Apex class. And this is a really small Apex class. If you attended any of the Rad Women grad courses, you would be able to write this. This is a small exception flow class that you can use to write. It's just invoking the typical exception. And what that exception does is if you can add it as an action on the screen. Let's quickly add it here. Sorry, it's getting slow. But what this exception will do is when you throw exception, everything is going to be rolled back. So none of these. Okay. So we are give it the name, throw exception. Let's do that here. And then we want to include the message. The message that we want to include is coming from the flow global variable. We are using the default message. So we can attach that at the end. So what happens is if we add this throw exception Apex class, none of these DML operations that are happening before is going to be committed. So this whole transaction is going to roll back. That's one of the ways to control what's happening in the flow when you have a fault path. So if we go back to the next way, fault connector, as we just saw, can show the screen with customer error message. So it can actually help us communicate that with the customer, but we just saw that it can't always capture all the information. So at the same time, with fault connector exception being handled, so whatever information that happened before is also, as I mentioned, going to be committed to the database. But what happens if you don't have a fault path on the right element, or you don't have it at all? Luckily, there are ways that we can build solutions that will help us get more insight into what is happening and be able to report on it. So whenever an exception happens on a screen flow, Salesforce automatically publishes a standard platform event that's called flow execution error event. You can look it up in the developer documentation. There is a really nice article written about it with all the fields it's capturing. So this is a standard event. That means that we can create platform event trigger flow and use the custom object that we can capture more information about the flow itself, the error it happened, the location, the element where it happens. So we can subscribe to this event and then log detail to that custom object. So in that case, user will still see standard flow error message, but error information is going to be logged in a custom error record. So because this is a standard object, we do not, standard platform event, we do not have much flexibility what's going to be captured. So the information is somehow limited. But the benefit of this approach is that there is no consumption of the governor limits to publish this event. So, oops, let me go back. So how would that flow look like? This is it. This is the simplest way. You would create a platform event trigger flow. You would select flow execution error event as the event that's going to trigger it. And then you can create a custom object and then just use the create records. Let's quickly look at this create records. So I have the error log custom object, and I have a bunch of fields on it trying to capture the information that are coming with the platform event. If you're not sure which field you want to use, you can look at the standard platform event and information that is capturing, and you can look at the flow global variable and see what information is there that you can capture. Here, I'm capturing everything that I can. I'm looking at element type, element name. I'm looking when it happened, looking at the error ID, and then error message. The benefit of this approach of having a custom object is that you actually have the option to report on this. You can capture more information, and then you can also do the reporting. So this is when it happens, like with the screen flow. So if we do this, we can get custom error log record. So this is how the log record looked like for the error I ran before. These are the information I'm capturing. But in order to handle errors in the record trigger flows, we cannot use the standard platform event. As I mentioned, it is available. It's published only when there is no fault path and only when for the screen flows. So what we can do in this case is we can create a custom platform event. And then what you want to make sure with this custom platform event, and it can look something like this, is that the publish behavior needs to be set up as publish immediately. That means that we want to ensure that transaction is not committed with using that Apex class exception, but the platform event is still created. So once we have this platform event, we can actually use a trigger to process it, to subscribe to it, and then push the information to that custom error log object we talked about. You can also use LWC to subscribe to it if that's what you prefer. And then once we have it, you can actually go to the flow and create records, use the create record, and then create a custom record for this flow exception log object. Oh, sorry, platform event. These are the information that I have on the platform event. As I mentioned, I'm capturing just the basic one. You can add what you want, but I'm capturing object, what's the error details, what's the record ID, where does error happen, and then what was the operation. You can go, as I mentioned, in your flow and just add it to the fault path. If you're adding it to the fault path, even if you have the Apex class that is throwing the exception, this platform event is going to be created. So this is one of the ways to actually have this created and reported on it without actually having anything else committed. So what I want to highlight comparing to what we just said is that publishing custom platform event consumes 1 DML in your governor limits. And one thing to highlight is that because we have a fault path here, the changes made to the record will be committed to the database. So if you don't want this to be committed, you would have to add the action that we just talked about. So the next thing I mentioned as a way to handle the errors is you can look at the debug logs. So if you ever had a situation where your flow worked perfectly in the flow debugger, but when you actually use it in real life scenarios, the records are not being updated or not being created, the DML action is just not being committed. So when flow debug is not enough for you, the next logical step is actually about setting up the debug logs to see what is happening with your flow. And if you ever try to do this, you probably saw that finding flow failure message in debug logs is time-consuming thing. And the message that it's posting, it's again not always clear without broader context. You are not sure what exactly failed, why it was failed, especially with the complex flows. So I had this issue recently, and I'm happy to say I found a great post by Luke Freeland on how to enrich debug logs so they can log better messages for flow failure. What you see on the screen is a QR code with a link to the post where Luke explains this approach with a lot of details. And he also provides code samples for you if you're not really Apex savvy, if you don't feel comfortable writing the code yourself, you can actually use the code that Luke write as an example and then adjust the message. So when it comes to this approach, there are several steps that needs to be done. First, you need to create that Apex class, and that needs to be invocable Apex class. Then you would go to your flow, add action, and invoke the debug logger class. You would have to save the flow, activate the flow, go and enable debug logs, and then you can run the flow either to the debugger or just run the go and do the operation in Salesforce that will actually trigger the flow. And after that is done, you can actually look and go and view the debug logs. So as I mentioned, this Apex class should be created as an invocable method. And I'm going to show you in a minute, but it takes a message. Actually, let's look into this. Oops, sorry.
So Alex, we have a couple of questions that came in that I think might be good to put here. So Heather had asked, would rollback do the same thing as that Apex exception action that you showed?
Yes, depending on how you do you debug the flow. If you click on a rollback, you will not have anything committed. What happens with the exception is that that happens when the flow fails. So if you do the rollback, you're doing that when you're debugging the flow. But if you're having an exception in the flow, then nothing is being committed when the flow fails without debugging when the user is using it. So that's the main difference.
Awesome. Okay, so and then Bao had asked, when using a fault path in a record triggered flow, any previous DML elements are not rolled back compared to when you don't use fault paths. If a flow fails, the whole transaction rolls back. So how can you get the whole transaction to roll back in a record triggered flow if you use fault paths?
As I mentioned, using that Apex class. So adding that Apex class to the fault path, you will not have anything committed. The whole transaction will roll back. That Apex exception works the same way as you can do it in the Apex. So with the try-catch option, if you add the Apex exception class to the record trigger flow, everything will roll back. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you want partial commit, you would have to be careful where you add it. I hope that makes sense.
Awesome. Okay, I think those are the two that make the most sense for now if you want to keep going.
Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned, let's look how this would work. So if we have, so this is one of the examples, sorry, just going back to the question, like this is how it would look like. I have a record trigger flow. I have, this is on a case. When a case is created, we are looking at the case related opportunity and then updating the field. And if this fails, I want to create a publish, I want to create platform event, and then I want to throw an exception. So I don't want anything else being committed except this this platform event. So this is how it would be done. So when you talk about the when you talk about the flow debugger Apex class that Luke created, you would use it this way. So let's go back. Like this is the flow that we have. This is the record that create record element that's going to fail. We want to send an email alert, and then you would just create Apex action and call debug log message. So what happens if this flow fails? If you have a debug log enabled on that user, the debug log would be created. But if you're going to look at this Apex action, is if you invoke it, you have the option to pass the debug message. And debug message can be anything you want. So it can be anything that you created, which means you can use this Apex action that Luke created to do similar how you would do it the checkpoints when you debug the standard code. So you can put several Apex action, add your own debug message on several different elements that you suspect might fail, and then do a step-by-step debugging. So this approach is really good if you want to go like through more details. You can add different things to the messages. You can add variable. You can add a formula that can be a mix of the text and merge fields. So you can use anything in a text template, and then create a variable and then change it. You can go through, as I mentioned, through different elements. You can start with the first element, see what happens, do the debug log, see if you can see it. This is one of the debug logs I've run earlier, and then this is the message I posted. So you can, case record creation failed. You can, this is just an example, but you can put anything that's much more meaningful to you and that will point out which element of the flow failed and why it failed. You can add the values. So you can repeat this as many times as you want. You can add as many debug log messages as you want. The only thing is do not forget to activate your flow. Like that might be no-brainer for you, but I actually tried this and forgot to activate my flow and was wondering why I can't see anything in the debug logs. So again, once again, this is the QR code. If you wanna look at the whole article, I strongly suggest it because Luke explained it in a very clear, very open way, and you can use, if you're not good with Apex or you're not comfortable writing it, you can use the sample that Luke provided and it will run just fine. And the last, but definitely not least, with winter of 24, we are getting one of the most sought after features in Flows, and that's ability to add custom error message element in record trigger flows. So flow error message, users have been seeing in pop-up different messages that are not easy, that are not sometimes even possible to understand. And so with this new flow element, we have out-of-the-box option to create meaningful error messages that can direct users to maybe what to do next, or maybe direct them to reach out to the Salesforce support, or maybe doing additional actions, like if there's a field that's being missing that's causing the flow to fail. So anything that can direct users to go back and actually successfully complete this automation. I also want to point out that when flow fails, the flow error email notification is still being sent, so the admins can see all the information. This custom error message is not changing anything. So I also want to point out that there are some limitations that I have seen with this new element. One of them is there is no option to add more than one error message on the page. So that might be something to think about. If you what's the type of the error message that you want to display, and there can be only one error message on the field. So even though that you can add 2 error messages in your flow, there can be only one on the page and only one on one field. The error message field is limited to 255 characters, which sounds like a lot, but depending on what you want to instruct your users to do might not be enough. And it supports rich text formatting. So if you want to yell at your users in bold text, you can do that. And since this is all still in org preview for Windows 24, I guess we need to see if there are any additional changes coming. But for now, we can all play in our additional orgs and see how we can use it. So this is one of the flows. I had to switch to my preview org for 2024. This is one of the flows I built, mimicking the process that we have in our work org. This is a record trigger flow that starts when case is created or updated. It looks at the related account information and check what is the customer rating. For the customer that are rating hot, we are actually updating values on that case record, and we are notifying account owner that the case is being created. And if it's warm, we're updating different fields on the case. And if it's cold, we are just sending email notification to the case owner. So this is how we are adding the fault path. The fault path is being added, as I mentioned, the same way. So it's a second connection from the element. But this is the custom error element that we're adding. So if you look on the right side, you have the option to add several error messages if you want. But as I mentioned, you can only have one on the record page and then one inline on the field. So in this case, I wanted to show error message on the record page, and I want to let user know that flow failed, giving them the message. And then because this is the only thing that might be missing here is the account rating. So if the account rating is not available, we can't update the case because that would be a mandatory field. So I'm letting user know that make sure that account has a rating assigned. So I'm giving users the option and instruction of how they can actually what they can do to have this flow end up successfully. The same things go for the worm. I can add this one, but as I mentioned, because I can have only one element on the page, I'm choosing to show this one in a field, depending on what is happening. So I want to also say that Winter 24 is still not, release notes are not ready. We can't really see them, but the treasure hunt is under the way. So if you have a preview org, it's a really good way for you to go around and play it and see what treasure you can find and then share it with the community. So just to summarize what we talked about today. So the flow errors should always be handled. I think we can all agree on that because what we have out of the box is not really user-friendly, not helping users, and it's just causing more problems for everybody. We covered 4 ways today with how you can do it. I think it's up to everybody to select which way they're comfortable with, which way they think might work for them. You do not have to go and work on debug logs if debug logs is not something that you don't look at, like that would be maybe overkill for you. Maybe you can go with just the custom error element that's coming with the 24, or maybe you want to go with platform event and everything else that goes with it because you want to report and you want to go into more details, understand the full automation process. As I mentioned, solutions are coming with out-of-the-box features with Salesforce and a lot of customization. So this might be your chance to maybe dip your toes into Apex, try with something smaller like those triggers that are used to subscribe to platform event, or maybe Apex class that is just throwing an exception. And error handling for flows is a really sought after feature. We talked about it. It's been brought up at every through the core sessions. So I think we should all keep an eye on the things that are coming from a flow team, from Diana Jeff and her amazing team. So that's all from me, Michelle. Do we have any more questions? Can you hear me, Michelle?
Oh.
Can you hear me, Michelle?
Testing.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I have no idea what happened, but my microphone apparently died.
That's fine.
So we've switched to a headset. We've got tons of questions coming in.
Okay, let's go.
So let's start from the top. Lindsay would like to know, how deep would you go with creating additional fault paths for create elements that are within the fault path? So like if your fault path says create a case, then do you build a fault path on your fault path?
I think that depends on probably your internal processes, how likely it is that your case is going to fail. If you're going with a simple process of, you know, the flow failed, you're going to create a case with just a few elements. You can do that. Again, if that fails, you will still get notification. So but I think you can go pretty deep with that rabbit hole. That's a really good question.
Yep, I think there are definitely probably some where if you're creating like a platform event, that really doesn't tend to error out much. But if you have a lot of required fields on cases and you forget to update things, then yeah, that could fail as well. All right, so Kimberly would like to know, what are your thoughts about using email to case instead of a custom object log? So in your fault path, leverage email to case to basically email in and create that case.
I don't think that would serve the same purpose. Maybe you can use the send the email to create a case, but what happens if that fails? And creating case that way will not be that easy to report on. You will not be able to capture that information from the flow that you want. So you would be able to create a case with some of the information that is available, but definitely not going into the depth. That depends on what you want, like how deep you want to go to the reporting and understand what was happening. I would still go with the custom object and platform event.
Awesome. All right. So Heidi asks a question that I feel down to the very bottoms of my feet. When you're using the debug logs, you have to set it up and choose a level. What level are you supposed to use?
Oh, there are amazing articles. So I have like dozens of debug levels depending on what I want to see. If I want to look at flow, if I want to look at the code, if it's just validation rule that I'm going to look at. So that depends on your use case. I would suggest going through the Salesforce documentation to see what different levels of debug logs do. And then maybe, I think, Michelle, that you have covered in the automation hour one of the debug logs, different levels, I think maybe last year or something. I remember I attended the session. So maybe we can look into that and share that with Heidi.
I'm fairly certain that was not me that covered that, because quite honestly, debug logs and I are not the best of friends. But I think you're right. There has been a past automation hour on debug logs. So I would say check our YouTube channel, see if we can find that. And that would absolutely have some great information. But yeah, I've 100% gone through the help documentation to try and figure out what is on which level and which should we have.
That might be one of those things that you just bookmark the documentation help link and keep going back.
Okay, so let's see. I got so many questions flying in here. I'm trying not to miss them all. This is great, y'all. Okay. What is the URL for Luke's article on the custom Apex error? I know you have a QR code. But do you happen to have the URL, or if you can throw up that QR code, I will scan it with my phone camera and see if I can't get the phone camera to give me the URL that I can then post on my computer here. So bear with us on this one just a hot minute, and we'll try and get you that URL. All right.
I think if you try to Google Flow Debug Logger and look Freeland, you will be able to find it. I thought maybe QR code might be easier than the short URL, but maybe I should have included both.
It's all good. We'll get there eventually. I'm just pasting it into Slack now so I can send it to myself and get that. All right. So while we're working on that, so hold tight. Rebecca wants to know, is that throw an exception Apex action a custom invocable class, or is that something standard that Salesforce has given us?
So it's a custom Apex class. It's an extension of the exception class in Salesforce, and we're using it just to be, we're making it invocable so we can call it out from the flow. So again, it's a pretty simple one. It should be easy to create. Shout out once again to, let me try to find it.
Is that the one built by Luke?
No, this is the one that we built in the grad women class once. Shout out to Adam Olshansky, who was my mentor, who actually showed us how we can build an invocable Apex class that will actually throw the exception. So it's pretty simple. I think whoever asked that, if you try to look into this, you might have several examples on Stack Exchange on the Salesforce page. This is pretty standard exception. It's pretty standard ask to have it. So I think it's one of the things that you can build and then reuse it multiple times in your flows.
All right, awesome. Next question. So Mark Jones wanted to chime in. He had originally asked how you felt about the new custom error message, and then you covered that in detail, so I didn't ask it, but said he has been experimenting with it. You can add multiple messages to the element, but he hasn't seen it displaying multiple messages. However, you can definitely include multiple messages in the element. Also, he hasn't seen the inline error message working as expected. What have you seen?
I have not seen any other. The only other I have seen is that I can't add two elements to the same page. So if you want to do that and then try to save it, you will get an error message from the flow letting you know that you can have that displayed. And I'm not sure about the inline message. I don't have an example here, but it worked for me. So maybe it's one of those things. As I mentioned, this is still being developed. Like this is still coming in winter 24. There are no release notes. We have seen things being published and then being revoked. So finger crossed that if there are any issues, they will be sorted out before it actually goes live.
Awesome. All right, so Barb Dietz had asked, can you redisplay the slide that shows all 4 of our options for error handling again?
Yes, and shout out to Barb. I know she's been doing amazing job handling flows. So Barb, let me just quickly go back. So these are all the 4 ways, as I mentioned. When you're dipping your toes into flow and flow error handling, it might be good to start with out-of-the-box features just to understand how the whole logic works. Maybe try to play around with it. As I mentioned, add the default path, and then try to add screen with error message, try to add email notification, maybe create a record. Maybe you can also use that custom object to create a record directly from here. If you want to look into that, just again, make sure that that's the approach that you want to have. And then the more you go into it, the more you comfortable feel with like a complexity of handling error message. Maybe you can start playing around with maybe this Apex class to throw an exception, like an invocable Apex class, and then even go to the platform events. So platform events are scary for no reason. They're very easy to use and very, very handy when it comes to things like this. The only downside for them is why are we using custom objects and not just custom platform events, is because we cannot report on platform events and you are not be able to use them in queries. So if you want to go in deep into what's happening, you want to have like some kind of historical track record, you would have to go with a custom object and platform event.
Awesome. All right, so Stacy Starkin chimed in with a response to the question on debug logs. That's what they are. She said finest. If you're picking a level and you're not sure, just go with finest. And I absolutely believe that. She says just using the bazooka, and I'm like, yep, if you don't know, just give me everything and let me figure it out from there.
Yeah, debug logs can be overwhelming, but again, as with everything else, as with Flow, you know, like try playing around with it. Create a debug log on your own user, you know, do the small thing, you know, make the change on the record, see what happens. And, you know, again, they're not user-friendly to read, but it gets easier the more you look at it.
Yep. Okay. So Rebecca wants to know, for the exception class, do you need a test class that goes with your exception class?
Yes, I would strongly suggest that you have a test class that covers it, because it's a simple class. You would also have a simple test class. I think if you Google the exception Apex class, you would find the both of them somewhere on Stack Exchange, so you can, you know, try to look into it. You don't have to write it from the scratch. I strongly suggest not to use ChatGPT for that one. Go to the community, go to the shared knowledge. The community that has your back.
So Bao had also asked, would you be able to post that invocable Apex action somewhere that they could reference?
Yes, Michelle, how do you want me to do it? Do you want me to send it to you so you can send it in the email as a blast, or whatever is the best way?
Email blast probably wouldn't work. I can't control content very well, but if you get it to me, we'll post a link to it.
Sure, we can use
with
it as a
the
shareable
presentation.
document. Yep, we can do it. Yeah.
Yep. So we'll get that. We'll put it in the presentation before we post the presentation.
Yep, and I'll include a test class as well for the person who previously asked, so you can have everything in the same slides.
Awesome. So Melissa had asked, can you show an example of a quote unquote user-friendly message?
As I mentioned, let me just try to go back. So one of the user-friendly message that I might have is the one that we're using in this connector. So this might be, make sure that related account has a rating assigned. Or if you don't know why the error failed, or why the flow failed, maybe you can maybe let know your user to reach out to the admin team, or let them just know that the admin team has been notified, the email is being sent to them, and they will be looking into it. So if you know why the flow might failed, like in this case, you can tell the user what they should check. Or maybe if it's if you know, like there's a validation rule that might be tripping this flow, you can use that in the error message. Otherwise, you can just show empathy to the user who might not be technical and they might be scared. This is maybe their first time using the Salesforce feature and they got an error. So just letting them know that this is being taken care of.
Awesome. All right. So Alan has a pretty involved question. So let me read through it and then I'll figure out whether or not I understand it. So when building a flow that contains subflows, once the flows are activated, I find it a challenge to check for errors in the main flow when I've updated the subflow. So is there a way to check for errors in the main flow without saving it as a new flow?
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't tried that. I would
Okay, so
say
I
maybe
think
that
what
might be
he's
a
asking, yeah, is like if you have an error in the main flow because you made a change to the subflow and you try and save it, it'll give you the list of errors that pop up when you try and save it. I don't think there's another way around that.
I don't think so, but this might be this debug log situation where you actually want to see. So debug log approach is really good when you have complex automation like that, when you have multiple processes invoking each other, then you can see step by step what happened, what was the variable that was passed, and where the exception happened.
Yep.
Although it's late to debug log at this point.
Yep. I also just told him in all capitals that absolutely he needs to go put an idea for this on the idea exchange and then share it
Yes.
on our community so we can all go upvote that thing.
Yes.
For sure. All right. So let's see what else. One thing I heard Alex say is to be sure you run your debug in rollback mode. Remember though that with screen flows, there is no rollback mode. So yeah, unless you put a rollback element into your screen flow, when you debug them, it actually happens like it happens for real. That's for everything other than record triggered flows. Record triggered flows are a special kind of beast. When it comes to debugging, they are automatically run in rollback mode, but they're the only ones. So yeah, that is a great call out, Becca. Unless it's a record triggered flow you're debugging, whatever you're doing is real. And that means if you hit delete on records, bye.
Yeah, as a best action, as like best practice, always do that in Sandbox, whatever you're debugging. I know that it's challenging, and I know that you might see the different behavior between same flows in different environments, because other things might impact. But always try to do it in a Sandbox first.
Awesome. All right. So I had another great comment. Hossu, I think is how you pronounce that. Someday you're going to have to tell me how to pronounce that correctly. There's an article on Salesforce admin's website by Jen Lee that is about basically what is a subflow, and it covers flow error handling as a topic and a great way to use subflows. So 100%, I would recommend you check that out. I literally just found the URL, so I'm going to post that in here also.
Awesome. Jen Lee is a flow natty. Like, she's a flow queen. I'm totally in awe with everything that she does. So make sure to, I know that she's not posting blogs on her own website anymore. She's writing for Salesforce admins, but any content that you can find from her is very valuable.
I think we should just promote her to Flow Empress. Like whatever's higher than
I
Queen,
totally
get
agree.
that one.
I totally agree. And totally shameless plug. If you're coming to Dreamforce, Jen Lee and myself, we're presenting on the strategies for moving from workflow rules and processes into flows. So come and find us to talk about it.
Awesome. All right. So Heather wants to know, could you just do that Apex for debug logs only in a sandbox?
Yes, you can. If you want to do that, that might be the best approach. If you don't want to mess with your production, I know that a lot of developers do not have that level of access in production. You can always use it in Sandbox.
Awesome. All right. So Heather also asked, could you show more about finding that error in the debug logs? So I don't know if you have a way to show us what Luke's error handling would actually display for you in the debug log. I might actually recommend that you check that out in his article. I think he has some screenshots there if I remember correctly.
Yes. So let me just find where it is. So this is one. Yeah. So once you create the log debug Apex action using the Apex class, you have the option to pass the debug message. And as I mentioned, this debug message can be anything. So you can create a variable here for yourself to see what you want to pass. So in this case, I just used case record creation field because that is my element, but you can use whatever you want. Let's say you have the assignment element and then creating and that fails. So the benefit of using this evocable Apex action that Luke created is that you can adjust the message to what you're debugging. So if I have 10 create record elements, I can create 10 different messages. And when I look at the debug log, I will see which of the error messages is being displayed. So I will know which one failed. I know which element to go and look back into. I hope that makes sense.
Awesome. Okay. So I know we're about at time. Bao had asked, could you run the flow in a way that will error and display that new custom error message that's coming with Winter 24?
Let's see. I don't have much records here, but let's try to do it from the debug. So I have an example. Let's see what happens if it runs. So I have a case that does not have the account rating. So if we go and look at what this is going to happen is we study the condition, we get the information from the case record, we looked at what is related account rating, and we supposed to be hot. So when we went to the update case, I said we wanted to update it with the information, and we kind of hit this custom validation exception that says that customer with hot rating must have phone number. So what happens is we were going down to the fault path. The Salesforce flow is telling us that this error has been handled. And then this is the custom error message that is going to be displayed on the record page. This is the message that's going to be displayed. As I mentioned, you can use the markdown, so you can actually put in a bold if you want to have something. So I wanted to tell user, like, this is what happened, this is the custom validation exception that we found, and then putting in bold the action item for the user. Make sure that related account has a rate assigned. So this would be displayed on the record page.
Awesome.
As I mentioned, definitely subscribe and go and open that preview org for Winter 24 and try to play around with it. There's no better way to learn for sure.
All right. So Hongda had asked, is there any other webinars like this one that go deep into Salesforce platform functions that are led by Salesforce MVPs? Alex, I don't actually know of any others that are regularly scheduled, but I know there's some great
Automation Hour. This is the place to be.
right? We appreciate you here. I know that there's a lot of MVPs out there that have some great content you could probably Google for on a specific topic. Otherwise, MVP office hours are available every other Friday. I think it's the off Fridays from this one. So if you're here this Friday, that means the MVP office hours are next one. Maybe it's the first and third of the month. See, I'm super smart about this. I don't know anything. But yeah, I would definitely check MVP office hours on the Salesforce Trailblazer community and check with them, but you can go and ask questions there as well. Another great resource. So then let's see. Best practice from Salesforce says you should send an email on fault, but the log idea, Kimberly really likes. Would you say that log is maybe a better best practice?
I think it's not either or. I think both of them could be useful. I think they might be serving different purposes because email is like notifying admin or whoever needs to be notified immediately. But then the log might be option for you to report on it if you want to report to your executives. It'll be hard to report on based on your emails. And you don't want to share your inbox with everybody, but you can actually build a report in Salesforce and show how many logs you have, like what is the succession rate of your flow building. So I would go with both. Like you don't have to choose at this point.
Perfect. All right, I think we are finally actually through all of the questions. I'm going to do just one quick refresh and make sure I didn't miss anything. But Alex, you've gotten tons of kudos and great jobs. This has been a fantastic session. Like in my opinion, this is one of those super important topics that we don't ever talk about enough. All right, looks like we do have a wrap on questions. So thank you. Barb says, awesome job. Good to see you. Melissa says, thank you. Mark also said this was a great session. So Alex, thrilled you here. Those are some great options on how to handle your errors. I think we should all be trying to do a better job of that, especially when we're newer to Flow, get into those good hygiene practices now. I didn't do that and very much wish I had. So again, thanks, Alex. So glad you could join us. Keep an eye out for the recording on this if you didn't catch it all. And of course, we'll see you all at Dreamforce, where Alex and I will both be presenting Flow sessions. So come check it out if you're going to be there.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Awesome. We'll see y'all next time. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, guys.